Hey everyone, welcome back to Intuitive Vibes Narc Survival 101. It is your girl Erica here. In this week's video, what I'm going to talk about is borderline personality disorder, or BPD for short, but not to be mistaken with bipolar disorder. I know the acronyms are kind of similar. Borderline personality disorder is the topic of discussion because I know we generally gravitate towards narcissism and NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, the behaviors, the traits, and things to that effect. But I wanted to talk about borderline personality disorder as well because, believe it or not, BPD and NPD, though they're two different personality disorders, they have a lot of similarities. Now, though these are two separate personality disorders, they do have some similarities and some differences. So in this video, we're going to talk about BPD, what it is, how to identify the characteristics and traits of borderline personality disorder, and their similarities and differences from NPD. Now, a bit of a disclaimer for people who are new to the channel. I'm not a medical professional, at least not yet. I'm still in the studies of psychology. This information is provided as general information for people who are just seeking answers to whatever situations that they may have going on. This is not in any way, shape, or form a replacement for anyone's mental health care, nor am I sitting here telling you what to do or to go and diagnose or self-diagnose. I always encourage people to go and get medical professional help if need be. With that being said, let's just get right into the video. Now, I need you to bear with me, guys, because this video may take a little bit because I'm going to be going into some really big details when it boils down to borderline personality disorder. Oftentimes, patients who are receiving mental health care can be misdiagnosed. So by that, I mean, when you think someone has NPD, but the reality is they have BPD or vice versa. Nearly 40% of people who have borderline personality disorder also have narcissistic personality disorder, but it does not mean that every single person who has borderline is a narcissist. Some people can have one personality disorder and not another, or they can have both personality disorders. So I figured it'd be better to just give you both sides of the coin so you can understand which one you're dealing with, or if you're dealing with both. Now, to understand personality disorders, you have to understand what a personality disorder is. So a personality disorder is pretty much a distortion of someone's personality. It's traits and behaviors that are deeply rooted within their personality. These are issues that people have that have been ingrained in their mind. And it's basically gone on for a course of many years. So it's kind of like that old habits die hard type of situation where you have certain types of habits that have been ingrained or certain types of behaviors that have been projected onto you since you were a kid up until your adulthood. You tend to kind of walk with those same behaviors, those same patterns. That's simply what a personality disorder is. It's pretty much deep-rooted issues within the personality. Now, borderline personality disorder, it's the same thing. It's pretty much a mental disorder that's characterized by unstable moods, behaviors, and relationships. Borderline personality disorder share a lot with narcissistic personality disorder. In fact, they're both under the same cluster. Now, personality disorders fall under three different clusters. You have cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. Borderline and NPD fall under cluster B. And cluster B personality disorders are usually overly emotional, erratic, unstable, unpredictable thinking, unpredictable behaviors. In fact, the personality disorders that fall under cluster B are narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. If you want to learn more about different personality disorders, I do have another video on my channel with regards to that matter. I'll put it in the description box below if you're interested in watching it. It'll give you the different types of personality disorders and summarizations on each of them so you can kind of get an idea of what types are out there and what types you should be looking for. Now, a personality disorder is pretty much a distortion of concept of oneself. This prevents people who suffer personality disorders from having healthy, functional relationships with other people. Now, people who suffer BPD have two main problems. They have an unstable sense of self and dysfunctional interpersonal relationships. Now, keep this in mind, guys. This is for people who suffer BPD and are in complete denial about it. So these are people who are not getting the help that they need, and this affects their relationships with others on an extreme level. I'm going to give you the characteristics and traits of these two categories, and then I'm going to give you the similarities and differences between BPD and NPD. The first trait is impulsive and self-damaging behaviors. Dangerous behaviors is very common for people who suffer BPD. And it could be an array of things too. They could be driving recklessly, binge eating, abusing drugs and alcohol, going on wild spending sprees, having unprotected sex, possibly with multiple partners. And often they can engage in self-harm or threaten or even try to commit suicide. The list of self-destructive behaviors can be ongoing depending on the level of the personality disorder and, of course, whether or not they're getting help for it. The next trait is poor self-image. People who suffer BPD don't see themselves the way others do. In fact, they think that others see them the way they see themselves, which is usually negative. Their sense of self is usually it's distorted with negativity. And often they have very low self-esteem, but they do have their periods of high self-confidence, yet low self-esteem. It's a fluctuating feeling for them. But the majority of the time, their sense of self is low self-esteem. And I often put this in the correlation with vulnerable narcissism, because vulnerable narcissists tend to see themselves the same way, except they gain their narcissistic supply off of everyone else's sympathy and empathy towards them. The next trait is paranoid thoughts when they're stressed. People who suffer BPD typically get very paranoid when they are in an extremely stressed state of mind. Now, we often get paranoid, some of us do, when we're stressed or if we're a bit insecure or if we don't know what's going on in our environment or what's going on with the people around us, and we may feel kind of guarded. But people who suffer BPD, when they're extremely stressed, coupled with their low self-esteem, they will become extremely paranoid, and this is what truly affects their relationships, their interpersonal relationships with other people. Other people may not want to be around them when they're at this point, because let's face facts, who wants to be around someone who's extremely paranoid? The next trait is intense and quickly changing mood swings. Now, this often gets probably confused with ASPD, because people who suffer ASPD, antisocial personality disorder, they have very intense mood swings. But people with BPD not only have intense mood swings, but it almost changes like that, which means that they can get over it within either a couple of days or, matter of fact, a couple of hours. And I think this is part of where people tend to mistake the whole narcissism borderline situation, because we know that narcissists, when they have narcissistic rage and the following day they just act like nothing happened, it's a very similar trait between the two. But their mood swings can be very extreme, very intense, yet very confusing because they get over it just like that. The next trait is they dissociate when they're stressed. So we understand dissociation is when you disconnect. When someone disconnects from everything, including their thoughts, feelings, memories, perception. So when you're dealing with someone who suffers BPD and they dissociate when they're stressed, they completely disconnect. They lose touch with reality, and they actually don't even see themselves in the situation. They're seeing themselves from outside of the situation, which can make it very confusing and very frustrating for someone who's dealing with someone who suffers BPD, because it comes off as they don't care about the situation. They're not all there. They're completely disconnected from the person. The reality is that when they're stressed out, they just completely disconnect from themselves, let alone the person and the situation. Now, people who suffer BPD have extreme abandonment issues. They become so anxiety ridden for fear of being abandoned that they do any and everything possible to avoid being abandoned. They become extremely panicky. But what they don't realize is their behaviors often have a counter reaction. So when they're struggling and they're fighting so hard to keep someone from abandoning them, the behaviors in the interim of it actually have the effect that they weren't looking for, and the person or the people that they're dealing with actually end up abandoning them. Now, another trait is unstable relationships. People who suffer BPD, they're kind of like a fan. And what does the fan do? It oscillates. So it goes back and forth. Someone who suffers BPD can go from idealizing a relationship to being extremely critical in the relationship. The moods and the shifts are so consistent within the person that it makes it very confusing and very frustrating for the other person or the other people that they have relationships with. And oftentimes in their unstable relationships, because of their fear of abandonment, the kind of behaviors that they represent in that relationship end up being, again, completely opposite to what they're looking for. So they'll either become extremely clingy and overbearing, where they end up pushing the person away, or they'll become extremely avoidant and distant. They'll still end up pushing them away. And this, of course, is done purposely. It's to avoid eventual rejection. So if they know that if there's a possibility that that person is going to abandon them, they prefer to do the rejecting to avoid the rejection. Their self-esteem is extremely low. Their self-concept is completely distorted. So that's pretty much their way of self-preserving, so to speak. Now, the next trait is misinterpreting facial expressions. You guys could be sitting there, chilling, relaxing. You're calm, you're cool, you're collected. But they don't see that because they correlate everything with negativity. If your face is not, if you're not expressing it or you're not giving that cute emoji face, they often see negativity, disgust, anger, pain, anything that correlates with negativity. That's what they're going to see. This is all based on faulty interpretations. So if you're sitting there relaxing and you got your resting bitch face on and you're just chilling, it does not matter. They don't see you smiling, or if they don't see those little muscles going up, then they often just think that something is wrong, something happened, something's bad, you're mad, you're sad, you're angry. And yeah, it can be very, very frustrating. And of course, anger management issues. It's not uncommon for someone who has BPD to be like a ticking time bomb. Their anger can be sudden, it can be frequent, and it can be very extreme. Remember what I said, guys. Their self-concept is extremely distorted, which means that they are completely engulfed in negativity. So any little thing can tick them off. And their anger can get so extreme to the point that they can find themselves in a lot of trouble. I mean, they can get involved in fights, assault cases, you name it. And people who do not get the help that they need, especially those who suffer BPD, their anger can get them into way worse. So if you are dealing with someone who has BPD, or you think they may have BPD, just understand that this anger, it does come from somewhere, but generally it's not from you. So guys, now that I gave you the gist of borderline personality disorder, I mean, there are a lot more things that we need to consider and a lot more things that we need to talk about, and we'll get into it throughout the season. But I want to give you the similarities and the differences between borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And just so you understand, yet again, do not diagnose, do not self-diagnose, but just understand the similarities, the differences, and the possibilities of the idea that the people or the person that you were dealing with may have suffered BPD, may have suffered NPD, or may have suffered both. So, without further ado, here are the similarities and the differences. Both BPD and NPD rely on other people to manage functions that most of us are able to manage ourselves. People with BPD look to others to manage their moods, while people with NPD want others to prop up their self-esteem. Both BPD and NPD live in alternative realities in which feelings create facts. Both project their feelings of badness onto others, who become the target of blame. Both are unwilling to listen to what they don't want to hear. Both feel a great sense of shame, which they cover with layers of self-deception. Both BPD and NPD often lie, and they both have stunted emotional development and are resistant to logic when they're triggered. They can both be emotionally and verbally abusive, and so they have unstable or impaired relationships. And often they see things in black and white with no shades of gray. For BPD, the major issue is a fear of abandonment. For NPD, the person's major issue is feeding their ego through narcissistic supply. For those who suffer BPD, emotions are variable and very intense. NPD, emotions may be shallow except for their rage. Those who suffer BPD have a fear of both abandonment and a fear of getting too close, thinking they're going to lose their independence. For NPD, many have an insidious sense of grandiosity. Those who suffer BPD can have suicidal thoughts or self-harm. For NPD, they have a sense that they are entitled to the best of everything, and they do not have to follow the rules that other people do. And those who suffer BPD outwardly exhibit feelings of abandonment, woundedness, and vulnerability. NPD, they have a tendency to exploit others. People with BPD have an unstable sense of self. People with NPD have a strong sense of superiority. Those who suffer BPD may have chronic feelings of emptiness. People with NPD have no empathy for others. And people with BPD may have a genuine interest in other people. Those with NPD do not try to get to know others, except to exploit, impress, or manipulate them. Well, there you have it, guys. Some of the differences and similarities between borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. Traits are very similar, but they are two different personality disorders. They are on the same spectrum, just two different personality disorders. But still, be on the lookout for both. You never know. Now just remember, just because someone may have one doesn't mean that they don't have the other, doesn't mean that they do. But regardless of anything, you have to be on the lookout. You have to be more conscious and more concise in how you handle things. Continue doing your research, guys. Continue learning. Continue with the awareness. Continue doing what's necessary for your peace of mind and, of course, your mental health. That's what comes first. So if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to give me a thumbs up. And, of course, join us every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our weekly Talk About It Tuesday live chats, where survivors of the community, and we're talking narcissistic abuse, sociopathic abuse, psychopathic, even domestic abuse. Does not matter what part of abuse you came from. You are more than welcome to join us. You get to be heard, you get to vent, and you get to meet some of the coolest people that you'll ever meet in this community. Every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. Thank you so much for being a part of the team. And if you're new to the channel, if you found it to be helpful, check out some of my other content. And of course, if you enjoy it, if you find it helpful, hit that subscribe button. So that way you're notified every time we come on and every time I put up a video. Till next time, guys. Love, peace, and all that good stuff. Namaste.